Just like last week, we are going to do more close reads as we continue reading through night. As we read, we're going to also be moving on from just doing topic sentences to incorporating textual evidence or quotations that support your topic sentence. So I'm going to show you the body paragraph template that you should have already reviewed and looked at, and you'll see that it's 8 sentences. So your topic sentence, which is the 4 parts that we already know. Remember, here's our sentence frame. Now we're going to be moving on to pulling quotes that will support the topic sentence, most often the tone word that we choose. So thinking back to close read number 1, when we said that the tone was optimistic, hopeful, naive, you would need to find quotes that represent that tone and support your claim or opinion. So what I'm going to do is show you what I did for close read number 3. I'm going to read this very quickly to you and talk about some of my annotations, and you will look at the annotations on your own as well once I link this into Schoology. So this is from page 43. Ellie and his father have moved on from the cattle cars. They've made it through selection, and they have just spent their first night in camp. So remember, we're looking for tone. Explain how the author describes the first night in camp. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp, which has turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the little faces of the children whose bodies I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath a silent blue sky. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget that nocturnal silence which deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to dust. Never shall I forget these things, even if I am condemned to live as long as God himself. Never. So a couple things that I annotated. You'll see all of my annotations here on the side. The first one that I hope you noticed while you read it and as you just heard me read it again is that never shall I forget is repeated over and over. So the author really uses repetition here. And repetition is usually used to make an emphasis. And in this case, I wrote that I thought the repetition was to emphasize the scarring that this has left on Ellie. He's seen a lot of really hard things, and it's really scarring him, and he'll never forget them. I also went through and counted that never shall I forget is repeated 7 times in this excerpt, which I thought was interesting because in the same sentence it says 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. And I went ahead and looked this up because I didn't know what this meant. So I went on the internet and looked it up, and it's a biblical allusion or a religious allusion in this case. And 7 in the Jewish religion is extremely holy and very, very important to their faith. It has something to do with the completion, to study the Talmud and reach completion. 7 is like the highly coveted number. So I don't think it's coincidental that never shall I forget has been repeated 7 times when it's a very important number. So I would only really learn that by really getting in with this text and annotating. The next one that I highlighted was the silent blue sky. So to me, when I was reading, I took this as when people often look to their God for guidance or, to have a conversation with whoever they pray to, they often look up at the sky. And to say that the sky is silent means that no one is listening, nobody is caring, and no one's watching. And he's referring to the silence of God watching his Jewish people and himself be tortured, right? He's devoted his complete faith, and now he needs help. And he feels like the blue sky is silent and that God is not there listening. I also highlighted flames which consumed my faith forever. So this is a moment of personification. Personification is when you give human-like qualities to non-human things. So the flames are consuming his faith. I also put that his faith is now never going to be the same, right? Never shall I forget the flames which consumed my faith forever. So they've completely eaten up his faith, consumed his faith, and it will never be the same. I again highlighted the word silence in relation to the silent blue sky. Like, his faith is wavering, and we know from chapter 1 that Ellie is extremely, extremely religious, and he really takes deep pride in his studying of mysticism and the Hasidic prayers and the Jewish religion in general. And so now he's feeling this really big change in his faith. He also mentions that he was deprived of the desire to live. So I wrote over here, he's lost this desire. He's becoming really defeated and hopeless. Versus in the first chapter, where they were all very naive and thought that the Red Army would get to them before the Germans did, they're now realizing what this means and how it's going to affect their lives, and how it already has. So he's now feeling very defeated and hopeless as he's faced with the reality of what these camps are really like. I also highlighted moments which murdered my God. So the moments being everything he's seen, right, are horrific enough to have lost his faith in God, right? He's asking for help. He's trying to see what's going on, and the things he's seen have started to make him question if God is even real. And the last thing I highlighted is, never shall I forget these things, even if I am condemned or punished to live as long as God himself, never. So what he's saying is, if he's punished to live a long life, he'll still never forget what he's seen. So now that I've read it and annotated it, and we've talked about, some of the big and important things that we wouldn't have probably picked up on our first read, I would go ahead and make my 4-part topic sentence, which I did here. So this is what we've been doing together for the last week, so we should be feeling pretty comfortable with this, right? So here's the author, the title, remember it's italicized, or if you're writing, you can underline it. The tone word that I chose was resigned. Resigned means to be accepting of what has happened, but very unhappy about it. And we've talked about this a little bit in our quiz prep, that the Jewish people couldn't really change what was going on around them, right? They didn't have the power against the German army and the Nazi regime to stand up for themselves. So he's accepting what's happening around him, but he's also very unhappy with it, and he's very changed. And I got that from right here. And then the why. Why is the author using a resigned tone? In order to show the change Ellie feels about his God and faith after the first night in camp. So here's my full topic sentence. In Night by Elie Wiesel, the author used a resigned tone in order to show the change Ellie feels about his God and faith after his first night in camp. So back to the body paragraph organizer. Topic sentence, check, done. It would go right here. All 4 parts. Next, what we need to do is include a concrete detail, which must be a quote from the text. So you're going to have to go back to the excerpt and decide what quotes here are going to support the resigned tone and also support how Ellie is changing. How is his faith wavering and changing? So you're going to need to go up here and look at all of the quotes. So from first glance, the ones that would work really well would be a silent blue sky, right? We talked about that. Nobody's listening and he's feeling abandoned. Another one would be flames which consumed my faith forever, right? That shows that something's happening here. Something's changing with the way he's viewing his faith. You could just use the word silence. This may be a little harder, but once we get comfortable, you can just do something like that. And you could also use moments which murdered my God, right? Pretty straightforward. His God as he knew it has now been murdered. So you only need 2 concrete details or pieces of textual evidence for your body paragraph. So you would need to choose 2 quotes from in here. The first quote that I chose is a silent blue sky. From watching the Powtoon, you guys know that you do not need the entire sentence. I think that's usually how writers want to go, because it seems like you should use the whole sentence, but you don't need to. We only need what's important for us, and we're talking about the change in God. So you can skip this and just focus on the silent blue sky. So here's textual evidence number 1. I wrote it 2 ways so that you could see it both. Another tip for you is when you're trying to embed quotations, close your eyes and listen can you hear where the quote starts? If you can, it can probably be embedded better. If you can't tell with your eyes closed where the quote starts and ends, then it's been embedded really well. So I want you guys to close your eyes and listen to this first option. After Elie Wiesel's first night in camp, he refers to the sky as being silent. So if your eyes were closed, you can't tell where the quote starts because I didn't say anything like the author says that the sky is silent. The author states the sky was silent. It's just one fluid sentence. So if you look at it as well, there's always something being said before the quote because we never start sentences with quotations in these body paragraphs. You need to introduce to your reader what's happening. After Elie Wiesel's first night in camp, that's enough, right? Now we know Elie Wiesel, it's his first night in camp. It's a little introduction. So with the same quotation, I wrote it a second way. The first way I only used one word, which you can, or this way might be a little more standard to you. So again, try to think, if your eyes were closed, could you hear where this quote starts? After witnessing the horrific events on his first night in camp, Elie Wiesel recounts the lives he saw taken under a silent blue sky. So again, it's pretty seamless, right? You can't hear where the quote starts, and there's an introduction, right? It's telling what's happening. He's witnessed all of these events. It's his first night in camp, and he's recounting all of the lives he's seen taken, and then here's our textual evidence. The second quote that I took was "moments which murdered my God." And I'll show you again, there's two ways. One of them is not as good as the other one. So we'll start with option one. Again, look at all of this introduction to the quote. This is in every single sentence, right? Nothing is starting with a quotation. Prior to his first night in camp, Elie Wiesel's sense of faith and devotion to God has been very strong. However, as he reflects on the scenes of the first night in camp, he says, "Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God." So this is the first example where you can hear where the quote starts. It's still an okay textual evidence, but it could be stronger. I would take this any day of the week, and as we keep getting better and better, we'll start working away from words like says. But this is still a really good way. It still has the introduction, and it still has a strong quote that supports the topic sentence. Option two is Elie Wiesel was witness to atrocities and death that murdered his God during his first night in the concentration camp. This one's a little tricky looking, but this is what we're going to be working towards. You'll notice that the quote is right in the middle. There's an introduction, and there's a little bit after. So that quote has been embedded completely, right? And by embedded, I mean it's been put into a sentence, right? It's a quote sandwich, like you guys have been looking at. The other kind of funky part about this one is the brackets. If you've already known about the brackets, then you know that it's when you need to change a word to make the sentence fit. If I had kept it as "murdered my God," the sentence would read, Elie Wiesel was witness to atrocities and death that murdered my God during his first night in the concentration camp. That doesn't make sense. The sentence flows, but the meaning doesn't make sense. I'm not talking about my God as in Miss Miller's God. I'm talking about Elie Wiesel's God, which means that I need to change this. And because I'm changing it, I need to put these little brackets around it. And then it becomes okay. So those are my two textual evidences that I chose, right? They're both talking about his God and how the first night has changed him, which directly relates to my topic sentence. So once I had that down, I would enter my two textual evidences, and as we get closer to next week and the end of the quarter, we're going to be working on commentary. So by the end of this quarter, you guys will be able to write a full, beautiful body paragraph.